The morning sun streamed through the massive windows of Newark International Airport, casting long shadows across the polished floors as travelers rushed to their destinations. Among them walked Dr. Chen, her wheeled carry-on gliding smoothly behind her as she navigated the familiar terminal with practiced ease. As one of the country's leading neurosurgeons, she had made this journey countless times before, traveling between hospitals and medical conferences to share her expertise. Today's flight to Chicago felt like any other Thursday morning. She had woken up at 5 a.m., double-checked her presentation materials for the conference, and arrived at the airport with plenty of time to spare. Her crisp navy blazer and perfectly pressed slacks reflected her usual professional style, with her hospital ID badge clipped neatly to her lapel, a habit she never broke even on travel days. The terminal buzzed with its usual morning energy. Business travelers clutched their coffee cups like lifelines, families corralled excited children, and airline staff moved with practiced efficiency through the crowds. Dr. Chen smiled at a young child who waved at her from a nearby seat, remembering how her own daughter used to love watching planes take off when she was that age. Pulling out her phone, she pulled up her boarding pass, first class, as usual. Her years of frequent flying had earned her elite status, and the airline's app showed her impressive track record. Over 100,000 miles annually for the past 5 years. The perks of first class had become less about luxury and more about necessity. The extra space allowed her to review patient files and prepare for presentations during her flights. As she approached the security checkpoint, Dr. Chen fell into her usual routine. She slipped off her comfortable professional flats, placed her laptop in a separate bin, and retrieved her ID from her wallet. The familiar dance of air travel was second nature to her now, each movement efficient and purposeful. She had even mastered the art of keeping her suit wrinkle-free through security, a skill that had taken years to perfect. The morning crowd moved steadily through the security lines, a mix of experienced travelers and vacation-goers. Dr. Chen checked her watch. Still plenty of time before her 8:45 a.m. flight. She had planned to stop by the first-class lounge to review her presentation one last time and grab a quick breakfast. The conference organizers had asked her to deliver the keynote speech on recent breakthroughs in pediatric neurosurgery, and she wanted everything to be perfect. As she made her way toward the airline's premium check-in counter, she noticed the usual mix of business travelers, men in suits, women in professional wear, all with the slightly tired eyes of frequent flyers. A group of pilots walked past, nodding in recognition. After so many years of regular flights, even some of the crew had become familiar faces. The morning light continued to brighten the terminal as more passengers filed in. Dr. Chen pulled up her airline app again, checking that her seat assignment remained the same, 2A, her preferred spot by the window. The app showed her flight was on time, a small relief given the importance of today's conference. She adjusted her carry-on handle and straightened her blazer, approaching the premium check-in counter with the quiet confidence of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. The digital boarding pass displayed clearly on her phone screen, and her ID was ready in hand. A routine so familiar it had become almost mechanical. Little did she know that this ordinary Thursday morning was about to become anything but routine. The next few moments would transform her regular business trip into an incident that would spark conversations across the country and force a major airline to confront uncomfortable truths about bias in air travel. As she stepped up to the counter, Dr. Chen gave a polite smile to the gate agent, completely unaware that she was about to become the center of a situation that would leave airline staff stunned and force everyone involved to question their own assumptions about who belongs in first class. The gate agent behind the counter glanced up at Dr. Chen's boarding pass displayed on her phone, then back at her face. Something in his expression shifted, and he squinted at the screen again. "Ma'am, could you please show me your ID?" he asked, his tone carrying an edge that hadn't been there seconds before. Dr. Chen pulled out her license, a movement she had performed countless times before. The agent held it up, looking back and forth between her face and the ID with unusual intensity. Around them, other passengers continued to flow through the adjacent lines without a second glance from the staff. "There seems to be some kind of issue with your boarding pass," the agent said slowly, though he hadn't even attempted to scan it yet. "Are you sure this is your correct flight? First class to Chicago." Dr. Chen nodded patiently, maintaining her professional composure. "Yes, that's correct. I'm a frequent flyer with your airline. I have elite status." She pulled up her airline app again, showing her membership status with over 500,000 miles accumulated. The agent's lips pressed into a thin line. "Just one moment, please." He began typing into his computer, painfully slow keystrokes that seemed designed to take as much time as possible. Meanwhile, other travelers breezed past their counter, their boarding passes barely earning a glance before they were waved through. A businessman in a rumpled suit walked up to the next counter, his economy ticket clearly visible on his phone. The adjacent agent processed him through in seconds. Dr. Chen noticed this, but kept her expression neutral, even as she felt her heart rate picking up slightly. She'd experienced similar situations before, the subtle questioning, the implied doubt, but it never got easier. "I'll need to call my supervisor," the agent announced, reaching for his phone without making eye contact. Dr. Chen checked her watch. She had planned to review her presentation in the lounge, but that window of time was quickly shrinking. "Is there a problem with my ticket?" she asked calmly, her voice steady despite the growing frustration. "I've flown this route many times before." The agent didn't respond directly, instead speaking in hushed tones into his phone. More passengers filtered past, some now glancing curiously at the holdup at the premium counter. Dr. Chen stood straight, acutely aware of the eyes on her, maintaining the same professional demeanor she used in the operating room. A mother with 2 small children went through the economy line, their boarding passes getting a cursory check before they were cleared. The contrast was becoming more obvious by the minute. Dr. Chen pulled out her phone again, this time bringing up her email confirmation from the airline, the receipt for her ticket purchase, and her frequent flyer profile. All the documentation she shouldn't have needed but experience had taught her to keep readily available. The terminal continued its morning bustle around them, but at this counter, time seemed to slow to a crawl. The agent's computer keyboard clicked away, each tap feeling like another small indignity. Through the large windows, planes taxied on the runway, their passengers already safely aboard, while Dr. Chen stood there, her credentials being questioned for no apparent reason other than how she looked. She thought about her upcoming presentation, about the young medical students who would be in the audience, about how many of them might face similar situations in their own careers. The irony wasn't lost on her. Being a highly respected doctor in the operating room, yet standing here having her presence in first class questioned. The supervisor's arrival was imminent, and Dr. Chen could feel this routine Thursday morning transforming into something else entirely. She took a deep breath, straightened her blazer once more, and prepared herself for what was coming. Years of handling high-pressure situations in surgery had taught her to stay calm in the face of stress, but this kind of confrontation required a different kind of strength, one that no medical school had prepared her for. The supervisor approached with quick, sharp steps, her heels clicking against the airport's polished floor. She wore a crisp uniform and a name tag that read Supervisor Wilson. The junior agent immediately straightened up, speaking in hushed tones while gesturing at Dr. Chen's boarding pass and ID, which still lay on the counter. "Good morning," the supervisor said, her voice carrying a practiced customer service tone. "I understand there's some confusion about your ticket." She didn't immediately pick up the ID or look at the boarding pass, instead fixing Dr. Chen with a calculating stare. Dr. Chen took another steady breath. "There shouldn't be any confusion. I'm a frequent flyer with elite status, traveling first class to Chicago for a medical conference. All my documentation is in order." She gestured to her phone, where her airline app still displayed her impressive flight history. The supervisor picked up the ID, examining it with the same exaggerated scrutiny as her colleague. And you're certain this first-class ticket belongs to you? The emphasis on first class wasn't subtle. Around them, the morning airport crowd continued to move, but now more people were slowing down, watching the scene unfold. Yes, I'm certain, Dr. Chen replied, her voice remaining professional but firm. I've flown first class on this route numerous times. I have elite status with over 500,000 miles. You can verify all of this in your system. The supervisor turned to her computer, typing with deliberate slowness. We just need to follow protocol, she said, though no other passengers seemed to be receiving this level of protocol. A young professional woman in the next line had her economy ticket scanned and approved in seconds. Dr. Chen felt her phone vibrate. A message from the conference organizers confirming final details for her keynote speech. The irony wasn't lost on her. In a few hours, she was supposed to be presenting groundbreaking medical research to hundreds of colleagues, yet here she stood, having her very presence questioned. Can you tell me how you obtained this ticket? The supervisor asked, still not looking up from her computer. The question hung in the air, its implications clear to everyone within earshot. A few nearby passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. I purchased it through your airline's app, just as I've done dozens of times before, Dr. Chen explained, her patience beginning to wear thin. I can show you the receipt, my booking confirmation, and my flight history. I can even log into my professional account where all my business travel is recorded. The supervisor's fingers paused over the keyboard. It's just that these premium tickets sometimes get transferred inappropriately, and we need to ensure. Inappropriately? Dr. Chen interrupted, her voice carrying just enough to draw attention from nearby travelers. I'm curious what makes you think this ticket was transferred inappropriately. The terminal had grown quieter, the background chatter dying down as more people turned to watch. A businessman waiting in line behind Dr. Chen cleared his throat. Excuse me, he said, addressing the supervisor. I've seen this woman on several morning flights to Chicago. She's always in first class. But the supervisor barely acknowledged him, continuing to scrutinize her screen. Dr. Chen pulled out her hospital ID badge, the one that identified her as a department head at a prestigious medical center. Perhaps this will help clarify things, she said, placing it next to her driver's license on the counter. Though I'm curious why my ticket purchase requires more verification than anyone else's. The tension at the counter had become palpable. Other airline staff members were now glancing over, some whispering among themselves. A few passengers had their phones out, not even trying to hide that they were recording the interaction. The morning sun continued to stream through the terminal windows, but the warmth from earlier had vanished. Instead, there was a chill in the air that had nothing to do with the airport's air conditioning. Dr. Chen stood tall, her professional demeanor intact, but her patience wearing visibly thin. This was no longer just about catching a flight to Chicago. It had become something much bigger, and everyone watching knew it. The crowd at the check-in counter had grown larger, with travelers slowing their pace to watch the scene unfold. A young woman in business attire had her phone raised, not even trying to be subtle about recording. Others were whispering among themselves, their morning rush forgotten in the face of the unfolding drama. Dr. Chen could feel the weight of her hospital ID badge where she'd placed it on the counter. The small photo showed her in professional attire, the credentials clear as day. Chief of neurosurgery at one of the nation's top medical centers. Yet here she stood, being treated like someone who had somehow snuck into first class. I've pulled up your profile in our system, the supervisor announced, her tone still carrying that edge of suspicion. But I'm showing some inconsistencies. She glanced at the junior agent, who nodded eagerly, as if they'd discovered something significant. A flight attendant walking past did a double take at the scene, clearly recognizing Dr. Chen from previous flights. She hesitated, then stepped closer to the counter. Excuse me, but isn't this doctor? She began, but the supervisor cut her off with a sharp gesture. "We're handling a situation here," the supervisor said curtly, not even looking at the flight attendant. The growing crowd murmured at this dismissal of what could have been clarifying information. Dr. Chen pulled out her phone once more, this time bringing up photos from previous flights, selfies with friendly crew members, pictures from airline lounges across the country. "Perhaps these will help resolve your inconsistencies," she said, her voice steady, but with an undertone that suggested her patience was reaching its limit. The businessman who had spoken up earlier was still watching, now joined by several others who seemed equally troubled by what they were witnessing. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, loud enough for others to hear. "I've seen her in first class at least a dozen times." A woman in the crowd chimed in. "I follow her medical blog. She's literally flying to Chicago to give a keynote speech." More phones appeared, people looking up Dr. Chen's credentials online, finding articles she'd written, videos of her speaking at medical conferences. The supervisor's face tightened as she heard the murmurs from the crowd. She typed something else into her computer, the clicking of keys almost aggressive. "We still need to verify," she began, but was interrupted by another passenger. "What exactly are you trying to verify?" asked an elderly woman who had been watching the scene unfold. "The doctor has shown you every possible form of identification. What more could you possibly need?" Dr. Chen checked her watch again. 30 minutes had passed since she first approached the counter. Her carefully planned morning was unraveling, and she could feel the eyes of dozens of strangers on her. Some were filming, others were typing on their phones. This incident was probably already making its way onto social media. The terminal's usual morning bustle had transformed into something else entirely. The space around the premium check-in counter had become a stage, with Dr. Chen standing in the spotlight she never asked for. The sun streaming through the windows cast long shadows across the floor, like nature itself was drawing lines between right and wrong. A group of pilots walked past, their conversation dying as they took in the scene. One of them did a visible double take, clearly recognizing Dr. Chen from previous flights. The supervisor noticed this reaction but seemed determined to continue her investigation, even as the evidence of Dr. Chen's legitimacy as a first-class passenger mounted. The air in the terminal felt charged now, like the moments before a storm breaks. More passengers had stopped to watch, their own travel plans temporarily forgotten. The incident had transformed from a simple ticket verification into something that everyone present knew would have consequences far beyond this morning. The tension at the premium check-in counter had reached a boiling point. Dr. Chen stood there, surrounded by her impressive credentials, her hospital ID showing her position as chief of neurosurgery, her airline app displaying hundreds of thousands of miles flown, and her phone showing countless photos from previous first-class trips. Yet the supervisor continued to tap away at her keyboard, acting as if she was investigating a serious security breach rather than checking in a frequent flyer. "I've been flying first class with this airline for over a decade," Dr. Chen said, her voice carrying across the now hushed terminal. "I've earned my elite status. I've given medical lectures in 20 different cities this year alone. What I'm wondering is," she paused, looking directly at the supervisor, "what about me makes you question my right to be here?" The question hung in the air like a thundercloud. Several passengers who had been filming the incident lowered their phones slightly, sensing the weight of the moment. The supervisor's typing finally stopped, her fingers frozen over the keyboard. "We're simply following standard procedure," the supervisor replied, but her voice wavered slightly. The junior agent beside her shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Dr. Chen picked up her hospital ID from the counter, holding it up so everyone could see. "Standard procedure?" she asked, her professional calm finally giving way to controlled indignation. "I've been standing here for 40 minutes, watching other passengers walk through with barely a glance at their tickets. So please, explain to me what's standard about this." A woman in the crowd called out, "I just looked you up. You're speaking at the International Medical Conference tomorrow. Others nodded, some holding up their phones, showing Dr. Chen's professional profile and accomplishments. The terminal had grown so quiet that the distant announcements echoing through other gates seemed oddly loud. Dr. Chen took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and spoke the words that everyone had been thinking, but no one had dared to say. Is it because I'm a black woman that you assume I don't belong in first class? The impact was immediate. The supervisor's face flushed red. The junior agent took a step back. A collective intake of breath from the crowd seemed to pull all the air from the terminal. More phones rose, recording what had become not just an incident, but a moment of truth. That's not. The supervisor stammered, but couldn't finish her sentence. The truth of Dr. Chen's words hung heavy in the air, impossible to deny or dismiss. An older businessman in the crowd spoke up, his voice carrying years of authority. I've seen this kind of thing too many times. We all know exactly what's happening here. Others murmured in agreement, some shaking their heads in disgust at the situation. Dr. Chen remained poised, her dignity intact despite the humiliation she'd been subjected to. I've performed brain surgery on hundreds of patients, she said, her voice clear and steady. I've saved lives in the operating room. I've taught medical students who will become the next generation of doctors. And yet here I stand, having to justify my presence in first class. The crowd had grown larger still. Airport staff from other counters were watching. The scene had become more than just a check-in dispute. It was a mirror reflecting uncomfortable truths about assumptions, bias, and prejudice that still existed in everyday life. A young girl in the crowd tugged on her mother's sleeve, asking loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Mom, why are they being mean to the doctor?" The innocent question cut through the tension like a knife, making several people look down in shame. The morning sun continued to stream through the terminal windows, now feeling more like a spotlight on a pivotal moment that would have repercussions far beyond this airport. Dr. Chen's stance, professional, dignified, but no longer willing to quietly accept unfair treatment, had transformed a routine morning into a powerful statement about respect, dignity, and the right to be treated equally. Through the crowd came a rapid clicking of dress shoes against the terminal floor. A woman in an impeccably tailored suit with a high-level airline management badge hurried toward the check-in counter. One of the passengers who had been watching the scene unfold had apparently contacted the airport's main office, and word had traveled fast. "What's going on here?" the senior manager asked, her voice carrying both authority and concern. She took in the scene, the gathering crowd with their phones raised, the flustered supervisor, the junior agent shrinking behind the counter, and Dr. Chen standing tall with her credentials displayed. The supervisor began stammering an explanation about routine verification, but the senior manager held up her hand, cutting her off mid-sentence. She turned to the computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Within seconds, her eyebrows shot up. "Dr. Chen," she said, genuine respect in her voice, "I see you're one of our most valued customers. Over 500,000 miles flown, elite status for 5 consecutive years." She looked up from the screen, her expression a mix of embarrassment and profound apology. "I am so sorry for this situation." The supervisor's face had turned an even deeper shade of red. The junior agent looked like he wanted to disappear completely behind the counter. The crowd watched intently as justice seemed to finally arrive at Gate 23. "I've been trying to show them my flight history and status for the past 45 minutes," Dr. Chen replied calmly, though the relief in her voice was evident. "I've missed my opportunity to review my keynote speech for tomorrow's medical conference in the lounge." The senior manager's typing became even more rapid. "I see you're scheduled to give the opening address at the International Medical Conference, speaking about breakthrough pediatric neurosurgery techniques." She looked up again, this time with genuine interest and growing horror at how Dr. Chen had been treated. Someone in the crowd whispered loudly, They kept a brain surgeon waiting for an hour. The murmur spread through the onlookers, the absurdity of the situation becoming clearer by the moment. The senior manager turned to face the supervisor and junior agent. "Both of you in my office, immediately after your shift." Her tone left no room for argument. She then turned back to Dr. Chen, her demeanor softening. "Doctor, please allow me to personally escort you to our premium lounge. We'll have you rebooked on the next flight out in first class, with our deepest apologies." The crowd began to disperse, but not before several passengers approached Dr. Chen with their contact information, offering to send her their recordings of the incident. Others simply came to express their support and admiration for how she had handled the situation. "The airline will be conducting a full investigation into this incident," the senior manager announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We have zero tolerance for discriminatory behavior of any kind." The supervisor and junior agent seemed to shrink even further behind their counter. A flight attendant who had been watching stepped forward. "Dr. Chen, I've had the pleasure of serving you in first class numerous times. You're one of our kindest passengers." This testimony seemed to drive the final nail into the coffin of the supervisor's routine verification excuse. The senior manager gestured toward the premium lounge. "Please, doctor, let me show you to our private conference room where you can prepare for your keynote in peace." She paused, then added, "And I'd assure you, this will never happen again. Not to you, not to anyone." As they walked away from the counter, the morning sun still streaming through the terminal windows, Dr. Chen could hear the crowd behind her breaking into spontaneous applause. It wasn't the recognition she had ever wanted or needed, but perhaps it was a sign that change, however slowly, was possible. Inside the premium lounge, the senior manager's face grew increasingly concerned as she pulled up Dr. Chen's complete customer profile on her tablet. The quiet luxury of the lounge was a stark contrast to the chaos they'd left behind at the check-in counter. "Dr. Chen, I'm actually speechless," the manager said, shaking her head as she scrolled through the screen. "You've flown over 120,000 miles with us in the past year alone. You've received our highest customer satisfaction ratings from our flight crews." She looked up, her expression pained. "And this is how we treated you today." A lounge attendant brought over fresh coffee and breakfast, having recognized Dr. Chen from her many previous visits. "Your usual green tea, doctor. And the yogurt parfait." The simple act of being recognized, of having her preferences known and respected, highlighted how absurd the earlier confrontation had been. "You know what makes this even more remarkable?" The manager continued, still scrolling through Dr. Chen's profile. "You've participated in our emergency medical response program. It says here you've assisted with 3 in-flight medical emergencies in the past 2 years alone." The lounge attendant's eyes widened. "Oh, were you the doctor who helped that passenger having a seizure on the Chicago flight last summer? The crew still talks about that." Dr. Chen nodded modestly, sipping her tea. "I just did what any doctor would do. We were lucky to land safely and get him to a hospital quickly." The manager set down her tablet, her face serious. "And yet today, our staff treated you like you didn't belong here." She pulled up another screen. "You're not just a first-class passenger, Dr. Chen. You're literally in the top 0.1% of our most valued customers." More details emerged as the manager continued reviewing the profile. Dr. Chen had been featured in the airline's magazine for her groundbreaking work in pediatric neurosurgery. She even participated in a panel discussion at the airline's corporate headquarters about improving medical emergency responses on flights. "The irony," Dr. Chen said quietly, "is that I'm heading to Chicago to give a lecture about breaking barriers in medicine, about creating opportunities for the next generation of doctors who might not fit someone's preconceived image of what a surgeon looks like." The manager's tablet showed photo after photo of Dr. Chen at airline events, speaking at medical conferences the airline had sponsored, even receiving an award from the airline's CEO for her contributions to their emergency medical response protocols. I've been flying first class for so long, Dr. Chen continued, that some of the flight attendants know which pillow I prefer. They know I like to work during flights and prefer not to be disturbed during meal service. She paused, stirring her tea. But none of that mattered today, did it? Because someone looked at me and decided I didn't belong. The lounge's quiet luxury suddenly felt heavy with the weight of what had happened. Through the large windows, planes took off into the morning sky, carrying passengers who had probably breezed through check-in without a second glance. The manager pulled up one final screen, her expression changing to one of determination. Dr. Chen, I want you to know this isn't over. This incident is going straight to our corporate headquarters. Your experience today, this complete failure of our system, it's going to become a teaching moment for our entire organization. As if to underscore the point, the manager's phone buzzed with messages from airline executives who had already gotten wind of the incident. The videos taken by passengers were starting to circulate on social media. What had begun as a routine morning had transformed into something that would force real change. Sometimes, Dr. Chen said, looking out at the planes taking off, the hardest barriers to break are the ones we can't see until we run right into them. She turned back to the manager. The question is, what do we do once they become visible? By afternoon, the morning's incident had taken on a life of its own. Videos from multiple angles flooded social media platforms, each showing Dr. Chen's dignified response to the blatant discrimination she'd faced. The airline's customer service lines were lighting up with calls from concerned passengers, many of whom had witnessed the scene firsthand. In the first-class cabin of her rebooked flight to Chicago, Dr. Chen sat quietly reviewing her presentation slides, trying to refocus on the medical conference ahead. The cabin crew, having heard about the morning's events, treated her with a mixture of respect and embarrassment, as if trying to make up for their colleagues' behavior. "Doctor, your phone's been buzzing nonstop," whispered the flight attendant, bringing over a fresh cup of green tea. Indeed, Dr. Chen's phone was filled with messages of support, from colleagues, from former patients, and even from strangers who had seen the videos online. A news reporter had already reached out, asking for an interview about the incident. 3 major medical associations had issued statements condemning the airline's treatment of one of their most distinguished members. The story was quickly becoming more than just a viral moment. It was sparking a broader conversation about prejudice in everyday life. Back at the airport, the supervisor and junior agent had been called into a series of urgent meetings. The senior manager's investigation had revealed a pattern. This wasn't the first time they had subjected passengers to extra verification based on appearance rather than any legitimate concern. The airline's corporate office worked swiftly, drafting both a public statement and an internal memo. "What happened this morning goes against everything we stand for," the CEO wrote in an email to all employees. "The fact that one of our most valued customers, a distinguished physician who has literally saved lives on our flights, was treated this way is unacceptable." As her flight cruised at 35,000 feet, Dr. Chen received an email from a young medical student who had seen the video. "I'm a first-year student," the message read, "and I've often worried about facing discrimination in my career. Watching you stand up for yourself with such grace and dignity showed me that it's possible to overcome these barriers without losing yourself in the process." The airline's social media team was working overtime, responding to thousands of comments and messages. Many passengers were sharing their own stories of similar experiences, turning the incident into a catalyst for a larger discussion about implicit bias and systemic discrimination. In the terminal, other airline staff had gathered around computers, watching the videos that were now going viral. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others discussed times they might have made similar assumptions without realizing it. The incident was forcing many to confront their own biases and prejudices. A group of flight attendants started a petition for mandatory sensitivity training, gathering signatures from crew members across multiple airlines. "If this can happen to someone like Dr. Chen," one veteran flight attendant said, Imagine how many others have faced similar treatment in silence. The business traveler who had spoken up during the incident posted his own account online. "I've seen this doctor on multiple flights. She's always professional, always kind to the crew. Watching her be treated this way made me realize how often we stay quiet when we should speak up." As the plane began its descent into Chicago, Dr. Chen thought about how she would incorporate this morning's experience into her keynote speech. Perhaps, she reflected, this incident would help future generations of medical professionals understand that breaking barriers isn't just about scientific breakthroughs. It's about changing hearts and minds, one interaction at a time. Other passengers in first class kept glancing her way, some having recognized her from the viral videos. A few offered quiet words of support or understanding nods. The incident had transformed Dr. Chen from just another traveler into a symbol of something larger: the ongoing struggle for dignity and respect in everyday life. 2 weeks after the incident, the airline's corporate headquarters buzzed with activity. In a large conference room, executives gathered around a table, reviewing the comprehensive changes they were about to announce. The morning's events had become a turning point, forcing the company to take a hard look at its practices. The CEO stood at the front of the room, addressing not just the people present, but also thousands of employees watching via video conference. "Today, we're announcing the most extensive training overhaul in our company's history," she began. What happened to Dr. Chen was not just an isolated incident, it was a wake-up call. Meanwhile, at her hospital office, Dr. Chen sat reviewing the emails that continued to pour in. The airline had not only issued a formal apology, but had also invited her to lead their new advisory board on customer experience and inclusion. Her viral moment had transformed into an opportunity for real change. A group of flight attendants had started implementing new greeting protocols, ensuring every first-class passenger received the same warm welcome regardless of appearance. The supervisor and junior agent from the incident, after completing extensive sensitivity training, had personally reached out to apologize and share what they had learned. The most powerful impact, Dr. Chen told a reporter during a follow-up interview, has been hearing from young professionals, especially medical students, who say this incident gave them courage. "They tell me that watching someone stand up with dignity against discrimination helped them believe in themselves." The airline's new training program was comprehensive. Every employee, from baggage handlers to executives, would participate in workshops led by diversity experts. They would review real-case scenarios, including Dr. Chen's experience, to understand how unconscious bias affects daily interactions. In airport terminals across the country, new signs appeared. "Everyone who belongs is welcome here." It was a simple message, but one that carried extra weight for those who had followed Dr. Chen's story. The airline's customer service manual was completely rewritten, with clear guidelines about avoiding assumptions based on appearance. During her hospital rounds, Dr. Chen noticed something had shifted. Colleagues shared their own stories of facing discrimination, creating an open dialogue about experiences that had often gone unspoken. The incident had given others permission to speak up about their own encounters with prejudice. The airline's changes went beyond surface-level fixes. They established a customer advocacy hotline, created a review board for handling discrimination complaints, and set up a scholarship program for underrepresented students in aviation and customer service fields. Sometimes, Dr. Chen reflected during a medical conference panel, "The most important changes come from the most difficult moments. What matters isn't just that something went wrong, but how we choose to make it right." 6 months later, Dr. Chen boarded another flight to Chicago. The difference was noticeable immediately. The check-in process was smooth and respectful. The staff, wearing new pins that read "Dignity for All," treated every passenger with the same level of professionalism. Other airlines began adopting similar training programs, creating a ripple effect throughout the industry. What had started as one person's stand for respect had grown into a movement for change across the entire aviation sector. In the first-class lounge, a young medical resident approached Dr. Chen. Your story inspired me to pursue my dreams, she said quietly. When people question whether I belong somewhere, I think about how you handled that morning, and it gives me strength. The incident had become more than just a viral moment or a corporate policy change. It had become a testament to the power of standing up for dignity with grace and determination. As Dr. Chen settled into her seat for another flight to another medical conference, she knew that her experience had helped pave the way for others to be treated with the respect they deserved.